As I said, good morning. Good to see everybody. Amber, Denise, Audrey, Paul, good to see you back on the screen. Bill, we've got your chair set here for you, you know, but it's been nice to have you with us digitally. Right before we got started, I said, "What am I talking about?" And everybody here laughed, but there is somewhat that element to a Dharma talk as you spend some time thinking about it, and it's informed part by what's going on in the world, and in part by conversations with people, interviews, whatever happens to happen at book club, what book we're reading. Conversations with Lori. She's saying, conversations with Lori, or relationship with Lori, or with Dan, I mean, and that rub of life that always comes up. But I did have a specific line of approach in mind for this morning, and you might have gotten a preview of it if you open the newsletter. But this is case 68. I'm just going to dive right into the case. Case 68 of the Book of Equanimity, which is Kassan's slashing sword. The preface to the assembly. Inside the castle, it's the emperor's decree. Outside the gate, it's the general's command. Sometimes power is obtained at the gates. Other times, reverence is admired within the chamber. Tell me, who is such a person? I'm just muting everybody so we don't get feedback. The main case. Attention, a monk asked Kassan, "How about when sweeping out the dust, you see the Buddha?" Kassan said, "Straight away slash with a sword. If you don't, the fisherman will live in a nest." The monk then went and asked Sekiso, "How about when sweeping out the dust, you see the Buddha?" Same question. Sekiso said, "He has no country. Where can he be met?" The monk returned to Kassan and related this to him. Kassan ascended the high seat and said, "In setting up expedients, I am better than he. But as to a profound talk of the principle, he is 100 paces ahead of me." The appreciatory verse, "A sword's spirit drives out the bull. The heavens are washing the soldiers. To achieve the quelling of a riot, who is he? Once there were battle clouds, the four seas were clear. With flowing robes, the emperor's governing is naturally effortless." So a lot going on here. Kassan's slashing sword. And so, one of the questions that comes up with this koan, and then often comes up in working with students and colleagues in this Zen world is where is Zen? Where do you find Zen? And then more specifically, often how? How do I do this? How does it work? What should I do? And then somewhere along the way, somebody might have a big opening, the big bolt of lightning, flash of light, whatever the experience is. What then? So there's these different stages, and where do you find Zen? When it finds you, you find it. What then? Do you hold on or let go? And I remember a few weeks ago, Brenda Lee made the comment, I'm not sure whether it was in book club or it was on a Sunday, but she kind of wryly said, "I know what Shiro's going to say. He's going to say, just let it go." And I just noted that because, yes, that probably is what I would say. But even the saying of that can become a pat or trite answer, a trope. Lori and I were talking about koans and the presentation of understanding of koans, and at a certain point when you've done, a few hundred of them, you can start feeling like, God, I'm always giving the same answer, And if that's true, then there is a question, because if it just becomes, a conditioned response, then there's probably something to look at, probably somewhere else to go. In the history of koans, there's a lot of shouting and whacking with sticks, depending on which era of Zen you're looking at. But then as you go on through history, teachers further on say, no, don't give me that stupid shout, What is your expression? How do you make it real? How do you make it real right now? How do you bring it to life so that others can see it? Similarly, there's the slapping of the floor, just this, what's your understanding of realization? Bam, just this. And, that in more modern times has become a cliche as well. And so on and on in the history of Zen Buddhism and in the stories that are related, you'll have these patterns and then the challenging of the pattern. There's a series of koans in which Joshu is challenged about the Supreme Way is not difficult, it just dislikes picking and choosing. And, one monk after another comes and challenges him on, haven't you turned that into a cliche? Dangerous question to ask of a guy like Joshu, but not so dangerous a question to ask of a guy like Shiro or ourselves, right? Because we are all where we are on the path, and where are we and how do we keep honing and refining that understanding? In my talk of 2 weeks ago, I relayed the story of being in India and having this dream or vision, right? The purple orb hovering in the middle of a pathway with nuns on either side, and then it goes slamming into my forehead and becomes an alabaster eye, And so then I'm there in India at the ashram, and I ask the Swami, how do you know the difference between a dream and a vision? And in the question itself is the problem. In the question itself is the problem. And the Swami said to me, he gave a straightforward answer. He said, a dream comes and goes, a vision will transform the entire context of your life. Well, this koan goes there, okay? It talks about both sides of this. Attention, a monk asked Kassan, how about when sweeping out the dust you see Buddha? Okay, so here's a monk, and he's talking to the teacher, and the question is, how about when sweeping out the dust and you see Buddha? Okay, so what, to just translate or unentangle this a little bit, we talk a lot about cleaning the mirror, peeling off the layers of the onion, sweeping away the dust, cutting through the delusion, letting go of the delusion. That's what this sweeping out the dust is. The monk is essentially saying, I have swept out the dust, and the purple orb has become the alabaster third eye. I realized it. I've seen Buddha. So how about when sweeping away the dust, or sweeping out the dust, you see Buddha? Now remember, Buddha is the awakened one. That is all of us. So this is a monk saying, I've had some realization. How about that? Kassan really just answers with a nice little bit of technique or technology, if you want to look at it that way. Right away, slash it with the sword. Cut off that. Cut it off. Cut off that story. Cut off that understanding you have. Otherwise, the fisherman will live in a nest. Otherwise, everything's going to go to hell in a handbasket, right? Fishermen are going to be living in nests, and birds are going to be in your bed, and everything's going to be all upside down. So the teacher here is just saying exactly what Brenda said, said I would say, right? Good, now let it go. What do you do next? What's the next task in front of you? How do you integrate that realization? How do you integrate that understanding into your life, into everything you do? How do you take it further? How do you polish that understanding so brightly that there's no understanding to be polishing, right? So cut that away. The second you live in that territory of, I swept away all the dust and I saw Buddha. I swept away all the dust and I saw Buddha. Try going down the street and telling strangers on the street that you swept away all the dust and saw Buddha.
They'll kill you for that.
If they don't kill you, you need to kill yourself. Laurie says they'll kill you for that. And they might. Okay, so later in the koan, Kassan, when he's told what Sekiso said, he says, when it comes to setting up expedients, I am better than he. So this is an expedient. If this happens, do this, right? If you find yourself in this position, do that. If you feel that you're realized and you have an enlightenment experience, get over it, cut it away. Don't let things go upside down. Get back to it. So this is Laurie at Ojai Center a number of years ago having a huge, undeniable opening, right? And I actually got in a lot of trouble with a couple of teachers by describing that as a Kensho experience. They were like, cut out that bullshit, slash it with a sword. Do not label Laurie's experience in such a fashion. It does not serve her. It doesn't serve you to have that story. The question is, what next? And Laurie had a meeting with Jikyo Roshi after that experience, which Jikyo sent her down the shamanic path as an adjunct or adjacent to her Zen practice, and said that this is an ancestral memory that you must do something with. But neither Jikyo Roshi nor Akasha dwelt in that place of wow. I was hovering above the kiva and my body was there, but it wasn't. That's all true. And it's all true. But, you can't hover above the kiva and take care of the ones around you that you love, not in any real fashion. So, get down to it. So the monk goes on to Sekiso and asks the same question. How about when sweeping out the dust, you see the Buddha? So he's like, maybe there's another, I want to see what this dude has to say about it, right? And the danger of doing that in the Zen world is that all the dudes and dudettes know each other, and so, so he asks the question. Sekiso does give a different answer. She has no country. Where can she be met? The monk returned to Kassan, to dude, and related the story. So this is the teachers now sharing that, this monk came to them with the same question. Kassan does a pretty interesting thing here. He ascends to the rostrum, so he gets up in front of the whole assembly of monks and says, you know what? my technique, when you find yourself attached to a thought, return to one, is really good technique. And when it comes to technique, when it comes to expedient, I, am better than he is. This is interesting, from a Zen perspective, even setting that up, I'm better than he. But then he continues, but on a profound talk of the principle, he is 100 steps, 100 paces ahead of me. He's 100 paces ahead of me. So what does he mean by this profound talk on the principle? So how Sekiso answers this koan is coming at the same truth from a very different place. There's no technique. There's no technique. In a way, Sekiso just pulls the rug out, from under any understanding that was there. Remember, I just swept away all the dust and I saw Buddha. What now? Sekiso goes to that place of absolute, that place of emptiness, the place beyond logic, beyond our human ability to reason, and says, really? You saw Buddha? Where? Where? What country does he or she live in? Show me Buddha. Where? What train did you get on? How much does it cost to get there? So there's like the fundamental principle, just completely yanking the rug out of sweeping away dust and seeing Buddha. Because the second you say that, the second you ask what's the difference between a vision and a dream, you've revealed that you again are in a place of concept, in a place of reasoning, in a place of story, in a place of the phenomenal. So, the very idea of sweeping away the dust and seeing Buddha, as Shishin Wick, who compiled this book, says, you just created another whole big dust ball. You're saying you swept away the dust, but look at that big giant dust ball you just created. Now, I'm better at setting up expedients, but he's 100 paces ahead of me on the profound principle. Which is right, which is wrong? Which is better? Which one's going to get you there? They're different facets of the same jewel. And at some points, that's just returning to one, the slashing with the sword. It's like, okay, this train of thought is doing me no good, this anxiety, whack, let go of it. And it's actually a physical act. And you've all felt that. Right? You're caught up by something and you go, oh yeah, counting my breath, return to one. Whack! It's almost physical. You can almost feel it, and you can feel the release as you let it go. Sometimes that is exactly what's needed. And other times, as in another koan, you open your eye unaware of seeing the dawn. At other times, it comes to you in the most absolute, purest place. The cry of a baby, the pull of a violin strings, the blooming of a rose, the hug, the sharing of a walk with a friend, seeing the dogs, having a great time. Neither one is actually better than the other. These are just different facets of the same jewel, different approaches. And so, how do you find Zen? Where do you find something that can't be found? It's right here. Find it right here. I was talking with someone earlier this week about how we create distinctions between here and there, between realization and not, between Buddha and not. In terms of, and I think this is pretty common, like many of us have special places. I mean, actual places. The conversation was not with Deanne, but Deanne, for example, is an avid naturalist and hiker, and I know a number of us share that. So for some of us, that special place is out there in the woods, in nature, on the mountain, right? And then we get back in our car and drive home, and all of a sudden it's gone. Or we come down the mountain, and the question is, well, what happened to the mountain? Well, where I ask, does that mountain begin and end? Where does the forest begin and end? Where are you painting that line? Where does realization begin and end? Where does love begin and end? If you really, really start trying to find and identify and penetrate that boundary, I don't know, bring it to me. Show it to me. It's a worthy endeavor. Bill and I walked the dogs the other morning. When did that walk end, and when does next week's begin? I mean, I guess you could say the second my foot goes out of the car, onto the trail, the walk begins. Or did it begin with Cora and Paco want to see each other? Or did it begin when Cora and Paco first met each other? Or did it begin when Bill and I just met each other? Or did it begin when I met Tenshin Roshi, who Bill had been studying with for 20 years? Or did it begin when I started studying with Yoshin Roshi? Or did it begin when I was born? Or did it begin before I was born? Where, when, how? I suspect Bill and I have always been walking together, and will always be walking together, even after one of us is dust that somebody's sweeping away to see Buddha. And that goes for all of us. I'm just picking an obvious example. So I just, it's a beautiful koan. Two teachers working with the same student, question asked twice, right? Different answers, which is right, which is wrong. You are Buddha. Zen is exactly where you are. I mean, look at all of us on Zoom and in the room. You could easily take a stance that Zen can only happen in a Zendo. Well, wait a minute, this isn't even a Zendo. The Han isn't hung. Oh, wait a minute, the Densho is still in the attic at Yoshin's. Well, I guess this isn't a Zendo, so Zen can't happen here. And then, well, it can't happen digitally, electronically. It can't happen over Zoom. I would say that our own experience here says otherwise. It says otherwise, and that is always available everywhere. Inside the castle, it's the emperor's decree. Outside the gate, it's the general's command. Sometimes power is obtained at the gates. Other time, reverence is admired within the chamber. Tell me, who is such a person? Are you willing? Do you have the skill? Do you have the persistence to encounter this practice everywhere? In the most sacred of spaces, and when you're putting the trash in the trash can and hauling it out to the curb. Sometimes in the reverence of the chamber, sometimes on the field of battle, sometimes on the 405 or the 60. Sometimes in the Dokusan room. Sometimes with the owl, sometimes with the jackhammer. Where will we find it? Where does it begin and end? It's really, to me, it's a really beautiful question, because if I really embrace that question and really try to find the boundaries, I can't. And then all of a sudden, it's all the alabaster eye. And it's all dust. It's all in the dust. So let's go raise some dust.